Today, I want to show a system where every change in business meaning creates a new, auditable version of reality, and production follows these rules over time automatically. We'll do that by taking a simple list of products and then building a couple of business rules for inventory management. Airtable is going to be our rule book. You can think of it like a blueprint. Postgres will be the back-end database that scales when it comes time to run this in production. Git will keep track of all of the changes version to version. An Effortless API ties it all together and keeps the rulebook, the database, and the code moving in lockstep. What's important is that this isn't a prototype of code, it's a prototype of meaning. There are three things to watch as we go through this. The rulebook defines our intent, the running system follows along, and the connection between them is versioned moment to moment. I want to start out by saying right up front that Airtable, in my personal opinion, is hands down the most effective tool I've ever used for defining business rules, exploring the resulting environment, and allowing the whole team to confirm that the behavior aligns with the collective intent. It's simply unparalleled in its ability to effortlessly define what is true, and we will repeatedly use it to capture our objectives here, and then to watch as those decisions flow into a fully versioned production scale environment. To begin with, I'm going to add a table called products, and I'll start by removing the fields and rows that Airtable puts in here by default. Then I'm going to ask Omni, Airtable's lightweight AI, just a 1 or 2 sentence prompt, a description of what we're doing so that it can give us some mock data to work with. Add 5 products with a name, unit price, quantity on hand, and an is out of stock field that is true when quantity on hand is 0, along with a product description at the end. So while it's doing this, I want to draw your attention to a couple things. This is literally a single sentence for a single business rule, and we already have 3 inconsistencies. The description field has in lowercase d, while the rest of the fields are uppercase without spaces. Further, the quantity on hand in the out-of-stock rule is lowercase and has spaces in the name. Ironically, this list of inconsistencies itself introduced 2 more variations. The is out of stock field was referenced as just out of stock, and the bug report used a lowercase version of quantity on hand without spaces was also used. Obviously, this isn't a controversial observation. It's just how text and natural language work here in reality. But here in the rulebook, it can't help but be consistent. It is not possible to have variation because there is only room for 1 column label, ever. That forced consistency is exactly what makes a rulebook executable. Okay, now let's take a look at the data it created. This product is out of stock because its quantity on hand is 0. These other 3 are not out of stock because they all have inventory on hand. When this goes down to 0, though, it will then also be out of stock. With each rule change, we mint a new version of reality, so let's label it. Added products with 5 mock products, some of which are out of stock. That's the behavior, ultimately the business rule, that we're trying to emulate for these 5 products. And at this point, effectively, as we've already seen in Airtable, the rules always just follow along in real time. So if we order some new ones here, and this has 5 on hand, then it's no longer out of stock. Now, as mentioned earlier, Airtable is the gold standard for defining business rules and prototyping that behavior with real users. In fact, I would go a step further and argue that at least 80% of the software that I've written and been involved with over the years, from tiny apps or websites to enterprise-scale software in highly regulated industries, could have been replaced at least partially or entirely without developer support in Airtable today. No problem. But by the time you're trying to access hundreds of thousands or millions of rows, or accessing thousands of rows at a time, Airtable ends up not scaling to that kind of level, at least not easily. Effortless API provides a universal no-code escape hatch, though. So we get all the benefit of modeling our environment easily in a modern, shareable, cloud-based service, like Airtable. And Effortless API connects that rule directly to an enterprise-level Postgres database that is just following along in the background. From here on, every rule change does the same four things, the version increments. Effortless API generates a migration script. The schema and mock data migrate, while the views and functions are also recreated to mirror the new rules. And then all changes are committed to Git, where before we had no demo versions, we should now have one. We have a list of the products with an on-hand quantity, and here they are. So we've got our mock products at different prices and quantities. The mechanical keyboard has none, so it's out of stock. But if there were 5, then it is no longer out of stock. This one that has many could also have 0, at which point, as soon as I save it, boop, now it is out of stock. We talked about Airtable not scaling, and this is one example of that. When you change the quantity on hand in Airtable, it could potentially take a second or 2, 5, or even longer to update whether it's out of stock. In Postgres, this is transactional. So as soon as it says this is 1 and not 0, as soon as this saves, this can't be 1 and have this be 0 at the same time. If this is 1, then this is going to be 0, and vice versa, every time. And if we look at the code, we get a git commit that records all of the business rules, versioned like any other code. Another thing we might want to do is fix this problem where if there are -5 of these, then it no longer looks like it's out of stock. And while you can't have -5 physical things, the database definitely can say -5. And when it does, the product is necessarily out of stock. This is the kind of bug that often survives for years, because rules are dynamic and should live as meaning, not frequently stale code. This should really be less than or equal to 0. No worries. In our rulebook, we simply change on hand equals 0 to less than or equal to 0. And as soon as we do that, now even if this is -5, it's still out of stock. Whenever we change the rules here, the production environment will just follow along. And if we go look at that function again, the out of stock rule now says less than or equal to 0. Let's make another change now. Back over here in the rulebook, we might decide that before we run out of stock, we want to set up a reorder level. So if it gets to a quantity of less than 5, let's say, we want to reorder. So I make this a formula. Quantity on hand is less than 5, and I'll call this reorder level. Now this one's out of stock, so it has to be reordered. If this one had 3, it wouldn't be out of stock, but it would need to be reordered. So we added the concept of reorder. And just like we did before, having updated this, I expect that over here in Postgres, we should now have 3 versions, including the new version that we just added for reorder levels. But this reorder is required here. Here there are 6, so it does not require a reorder. But here we have a quantity of 15 and no reorder is indicated. But if there were only 4 of those, then it requires a reorder, even though it's not out of stock. And indeed, now it requires a reorder. So here again, Postgres is simply mirroring what the rulebook says. The difference, though, is that in this case, the translation from our intent, what we specified in Airtable, into Postgres completely removes the game of telephone that usually requires first describing what we want in English to somebody who hopefully also speaks English, who must first understand it themselves in order to be able to translate it into at least one or more different languages, as documentation, SQL scripts, Python, or .NET code, all hopefully without mistakes or anything else being lost in translation. But the kinds of things being translated here are just these functions. Is the product out of stock? What is the reorder level? And so whether it's out of stock looks at quantity on hand equal to 0. And for the reorder level, if it is less than 5, those rules are already here. The important thing is I don't ever want to have to think about SQL syntax. We've already said what we meant, so I don't want to have to learn or manage or maintain the syntax, whether it's : integer, or whether there's a space here, or maybe the type goes at the beginning. Once I've specified what I want in the rulebook, this should just follow along. And the final piece of the puzzle is that in Git, it has continued monitoring and recording our changes over time. So here's the first change that it made. We created the products table. Then it created the function for calculating whether it's out of stock. Then we fixed the less than or equal to zero bug. And then finally, we added the reorder level. So each rule gets encoded, each change is auditable, and Effortless API just keeps the production implementation separated and following along with the rulebook. The moment we can point to the living rulebook in Airtable or any other no-code environment and say that is what we want, then it can be confidently injected into any other language or technical context. Effortless API lets intent flow from stakeholders to production with auditable history cradle to grave. It's version control for meaning, like Git, but for the business rules themselves.